Thank you all for coming. Buenos dias. On behalf of Mujeres Latinas en Acción, we're very happy to talk about our year after the launch of our Actívate position paper that was done in partnership with UIC Great Cities Institute. And I am delighted to be joined by three excellent leaders in Illinois. We have Representative Norma Hernandez, the Executive Director of the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and Woods Fund Program Officer Andrea Ortiz. Please thank you for all the applause for these wonderful speakers. So just a little background about Actívate. So Mujeres Latinas en Acción is the longest standing Latina organization in the country. We are 51 years old, and yes. And we wanted to do several activities to celebrate our 50th anniversary here in Chicago. And one of them was creating our first position paper. And so we approached UIC Great Cities to do this, and we were very excited by the results. One of the things that was really important for us is as we do more advocacy work in Chicago, Cook County, the state, and across the country, we want to make sure it's grounded in policy recommendations that are based on community data-driven results and information, to make sure that we're guided in the right direction that is very much grounded in what community needs. I know that there are some copies of Actívate that are in the front as you register, so please feel free to grab one or take one or go to our website and you can find it as well. One of the things that we wanted to make sure that we did with Actívate was to widely distribute it, but also to make sure that we were taking action steps to do the work that we always want to do for supporting survivors, entrepreneurs, organizers, promotores de salud, and other participants at Mujeres Latinas en Acción. So I wanted to, first of all, direct some questions to these lovely leaders, but making sure to remind you that at your tables there are bios. They have fabulous backgrounds and experiences, but I don't want to use our precious time on reading that, so I will take that cue from the previous moderator. I would love to hear from each of you, what your perspective was and what context were you wanting to be involved with Mujeres and the Actívate project. So I'll go to Representative Norma Hernandez first, who has a special history with the project.
Thank you so much, Linda. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Buenos dias. I'm very grateful to be here, and it's a very much full circle moment for many reasons, but as a former employee for Great Cities Institute, I had the privilege to immerse myself in doing a lot of research from all different kinds, from all over the city. And even before I even thought about running for office or even having the opportunity to be an elected official in this space, I was under the leadership and mentorship of Teresa Cordova, who really gave me the opportunity to see that I too can be a researcher and what that looked like. I too can be a professor one day and get involved in the world of academia, because I see the power of research and how research really is what helps shift policies. And also that's the tools that organizers and policy advocates and community leaders need in order for them to also be able to push their agenda. And when the conversation started around Actívate, Teresa actually involved me in those conversations from the very beginning. And I remember getting introduced to Linda and everyone from the entire team of Mujeres Latinas en Acción. And I was there from the very beginning of the entire design of this document to also facilitating the focus groups with hundreds of women, survivors that were already being either have already gone through the Mujeres Latinas en Acción resource, have already used their resources, but are continuing to get their services, and really getting an idea of what these women have gone through in a sensitive manner, right? Because it's a very sensitive topic, but making sure that we're getting the information that we need to know that what they're currently getting in terms of resources and services is working, and where the gaps are, and how we can improve, and how we can continue to make sure that Mujeres Latinas en Acción stays as a grassroots organization and make sure that they are serving their community well, and how much more resources we can get if we do real strategic planning. So being involved in all of that from the very beginning of this document to then advocating for funding and resources in Springfield this year on the state budget, some of the things that we were very concerned about was the loss of ARPA funds and what that does to domestic violence and sexual assault survivor services. And knowing that losing this money, we already need more money now with the current money that we have with ARPA. Now imagine losing the ARPA funds and having even less. And being in Springfield and advocating with all of our caucuses, right, the Latino caucus, the Progressive caucus, the Women's caucus, and making sure that this was an issue area that we put at the forefront when it comes to protecting women and survivors, not just women, right, but understanding that this was my moment to really advocate strongly, because I literally was here from the very beginning as someone that's a survivor as well. It really meant a lot to me to make sure that we really pushed for this, and we were able to get that funding. It was the first of its kind for it to be that much in Illinois history, and we're thankful that Governor Pritzker and also the Illinois legislator, General Assembly, were able to also not fight us to get this funding. It didn't seem like it was actually going to be a very hard ask when you think about the bigger picture. So that's what it meant to me, is being that advocate from the very beginning to having be a policymaker and making sure that we got the resources that we needed for our communities.
Thank you, Representative Hernandez. So for Mujeres, we were just delighted to have Representative Hernandez join us, because to really be someone who's a student and then run for office and then represent Illinois in such a great way and survivors across the state, it's such a unique perspective. So thank you so much for that. So next I want to direct a question to Carrie Ward of Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Mujeres has been a longtime partner of Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Our staff have worked closely with ICASA team for many initiatives and many program services. And I've enjoyed working with Carrie in Springfield, talking to our legislators about the importance of funding for sexual assault survivors as a priority for Illinois policymakers. In Actívate, a section on gender-based violence, one of the policy priorities was establishing the need for long-term sustainable funding for survivor services. Shortly after the Actívate publication, rape crisis centers in Illinois supporting survivors and across the country and territories received devastating cuts through the Victims of Crime Act funding, which is a critical source of grants funding for gender-based violence services across the country. Carrie, can you take a moment to share about our historic win this past spring for rape crisis centers in Illinois, and why a multi-pronged approach to advocacy for survivor services is so important?
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. I think timing is impeccable sometimes for the good and sometimes not so much. And the rollout of Actívate and sharing the information and the data therein really aligned with the budget cuts that Linda referred to. ICASA, as a statewide network of rape crisis centers, had received about $18.8 million in federal VOCA funds. And we learned in February of 2023 that effective 4 months later, we would be losing 50% of that funding. And that was devastating news to us. And we immediately, as a coalition and with all of our partners like Mujeres Latinas and Acción, jumped into action to try to address that in the FY24 Illinois state budget. And the wheels were already in motion for that budget, and we were unsuccessful in getting some additional funding. And what we know is the impact of that was horrific, that sexual assault programs lost staff, there are survivors that didn't receive services, there are hospitals that were reduced services. All these things happened that we knew would happen as a result of such a significant loss. And so we regrouped for FY25, and we came back and we built our coalition. And that included legislators like Representative Hernandez. It included Mujeres Latinas and Acción. It included survivors and folks from across the state. And we made every effort to go into the Illinois General Assembly and ask for $20 million for rape crisis services in FY25. And that would be a historic increase for us. We had received about $7.6 million for about 20 years and had never really seen that investment in Illinois. And our collective was large. I think our support was significant. We had support from the Latino caucus, the Progressive caucus, the Women's caucus, because it only makes sense to fund this issue, right? You know, this is not, everyone knows someone who has been impacted by sexual violence. Everyone knows someone who's been impacted by sexual violence, and they've been historically underfunded. And so our collective effort was successful this year in achieving $20 million for sexual assault services. But what we know, and what all of you know, is partly that helps offset devastating cuts that we had, right? So it isn't that we just jumped forward $20 million. It meant that we used part of that to fill a hole that we weren't expecting, a $9.5 million hole. And so I think when we look at the data that was included in Actívate about how we need sustainable, ongoing funding sources for sexual assault services, it states something that should be so clear to all of us. Until sexual violence ends, we're going to need to support the efforts to support survivors in our communities. And so I think a sustained, ongoing source of funding, federal, state, and community-based, are all essential in the work that we do. And I'm just so proud of the win. I think it shows that we are better together. And I'll just share with you an example. When Mujeres Latinas came to, we decided we would have a rally in Springfield. We had not had a rally bringing all 31 centers together in several years, and we decided that we would have a rally, and we needed to be in the Capitol, in the Rotunda, demonstrating the support for these needed funds. And one of the first agencies to show up for the rally, bringing over 30 community members, actually an entire busload of community members, near 46 community members, and bringing all the wonderful support was Mujeres Latinas and Acción. I've had the opportunity to be with Linda and with Saeed at the national level, at the state level, and we're going to need to keep up this kind of effort to make sure that those funds are retained in the future. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Carrie. One of the delights that we had with Actívate is that we did a couple roundtables. And one of the roundtables we did was a legislative roundtable at our Brighton Park office at Esperanza Health Centers. And Carrie traveled from Springfield to join us as we met with many members of the Illinois Legislative Latino Caucus. Representative Hernandez was there. But we had Latina policymakers from the federal, state, county, and city who were really wanting to understand what Mujeres Latinas and Acción had to report based on our Actívate position paper. So thank you so much, Carrie, for being with us. Absolutely. And one of our other roundtables was for funders, and we were delighted that Andrea, as well as Norma Garcia from Healthy Communities Foundation, helped to co-moderate and organize a funders roundtable. So I'd like to ask Andrea, as a program officer for the Woods Fund, and because of your own personal connection to organizing in the Southwest side, can you share why funders supported Actívate's mission and approach to collecting community-driven data and informing Mujeres' advocacy priorities?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. So I actually started with philanthropy about 18 months ago, so my time with philanthropy is relatively young. My background is really in community organizing, mostly on the southwest side of the city and in the south suburbs. So I had the pleasure of meeting Saeed and Gil early in my philanthropic journey and learned about their work around Actívate and was really motivated to see how we could leverage the work that they had done and ultimately position it in a way that met at the intersection of multiple stakeholders. And so I should share a little bit about Woods Fund for those that do not know a little bit about our work. We fund exclusively community organizing and advocacy work throughout the city of Chicago, and we prioritize organizations that are grassroots, focusing on a racial equity lens, and ultimately that means our portfolio is issue agnostic. So we have a variety of issue areas that we serve through and with our grantee partners. So keeping that in mind, Actívate, I think, was exactly at the nucleus of what various stakeholders needed to really amplify and elevate their work. And I saw my positionality as one that allowed me to bring those various stakeholders. And I think the funder briefing was, as mentioned, was intended to serve that, right? So we worked together to bring funders to the table to really engage with the data in the report, but then also ask themselves, what does this data telling you, and how will it change your approach to how you work with your board and what you prioritize in your funding, right? So we had very direct and concrete asks of funders. I think folks were able to walk away very clear on this is a community-driven, rooted in data report. We can't ignore this. If we truly are funders that want to hear and prioritize the needs of those directly impacted by the issues, then these are exactly the documents that need to govern and dictate how we leverage resources in the philanthropic space. I think in addition, the other stakeholders that we brought to the table was because our portfolio is comprised of community organizations and policymakers, we were able to also spread the knowledge of Actívate and ensure that our grantee partners also were aware of the data that was being captured through this work so that they too could elevate and speak concretely to the needs that their community members had. So it was very exciting for me to step into philanthropy and to already be asked to kind of play that, for a visual, that like octopus role of connecting various stakeholders and being able to ultimately amplify the hard work that was done through the work of Actívate.
Thank you, Andrea. One of the lessons or takeaways that I had from the report that really stood out to my attention was how the housing crisis that's nationwide, but also in Illinois, is affecting survivors and Latinas and their families. It's to the point where now Mujeres Latinas and Acción is exploring ways to do housing services. We don't operate a shelter. We've never formally done any housing support other than emergency cash assistance for rental payments or mortgage payment. But because of the work of Actívate, we are rethinking our work, and we're hoping that we can get into the rapid rehousing space. So what is a lesson or takeaway from Actívate that you have found in alignment in your work? In other words, why uplift Actívate or similar position papers?
I think for me, specifically with what Linda was saying, really being in those focus rooms that I was a part of during the time they were doing this report, I take those stories with me of the women that were advocating for, again, housing is such an issue. That was one of the things that we kept seeing over and over again is we need more affordable housing. We need more sustainable affordable housing. We also need more mental health, long-term services, not just short-term. And this is part of an even larger conversation to mental health, right? Then for me, it helps me shift my focus again to mental health services that's long-term all across the board, not just women survivors, right? And I think the same thing goes with bilingual services as well, because I think that, and again, we're grateful for Mujeres Latinas en Acción because it is one of those very few organizations, right, that is focusing on Latinas in general and has already the Spanish language services, but we need more of that in the suburbs. And I think that was another finding that we got was that the need for more services in the suburbs, Spanish services in the suburbs is so high. And that's, again, a lot of why I ended up running for office. So I really do take a lot of those stories with me, and I take that to Springfield every time I go in Springfield.
Gracias.
One of the reasons I would add as to why to uplift a project like Actívate is there are two things. One is it validates some of the information that I feel like we know anecdotally, or that we just know that what we've seen in our individual communities, what we've heard from people, and it backs that up with data. I think there are some circumstances, some funders, some situations where our anecdotal information isn't sufficient, and they want to see specifically what do the numbers say. So I think that's one of the things that Actívate does. But the other thing I think that is really important is it also illuminates things that we might not have recognized before. And I think there are times we're going down one path because we think this is what's effective, and sometimes we have to step back and realize what we're being told is that doesn't work the way we thought it did, or it used to and it doesn't anymore. And so I think it provides an opportunity to open our minds to new information and to make sure we're putting our resources in the places where it needs to go.
Thank you, Carrie.
I think in addition to what's already been shared, it ultimately makes research accessible to community, and that is invaluable. It also regrounds our work in community voice, right? It should bring stakeholders together to engage in thoughtful conversation, but ultimately remind us who we're prioritizing, who we should be prioritizing, and what we should have at the center of our work. And I think in re-emphasizing those priorities, it provides clarity, right? It reminds us that, especially in the world of philanthropy, where we can ride the wave of a hot new topic or a new issue area, we often are looking for the things that are reminding us of what the focus should ultimately be. So.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. You know, one of when we were in Springfield fighting for the historical increase for rape crisis centers, I would hear from our legislators saying, "Linda, we need data. What is really important right now? What can you share with us?" And so having Actívate in your possession and be able to answer those questions from legislators in Springfield was keenly important. So I thank those individuals who are joining me with the panel to talk about the power of Actívate. And before we go on to the next presentation, I do want to say that please, if you represent a not-for-profit that is doing community-based work grounded in social justice and want to think about doing a similar report or position paper, Mujeres would be happy to talk to you, but also think about UIC Gray Cities Institute to do that report. We were lucky to have funders support to do this, and then activists and legislators to help lift it up. But Actívate was a game changer for Mujeres, and it obviously had an impact in Illinois in the way we think about the need to prioritize sexual assault survivors. So I really encourage you to think about creating your own position papers to lift up the work that you are doing in community day in and day out. So thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Please, a round of applause for them. And I hope I get a brownie from Teresa for ending on time.